Hello everyone, my name is Ray Bowman and this is my Week 2 Multimedia discussion on MPA 545 Conflict Resolution and Labor Negotiation. This week's presentation will cover 4 authors from chapters 1 to 3 of our Eisenhart and Spangel textbook, and will cover a variety of topics, including conflict spirals, collaborative approach to conflict resolution, factors that promote mutual gains, factors that inhibit effective negotiation, a list of my references, and of course, my closing. The first authors in this presentation are Jess Alberts and Gillian Driscoll, and their work is referenced in Chapter 2 under the section Conflict in Action on page 17 on the last paragraph. Their article is called Containment versus Escalation, the Trajectory of Couples Conversational Complaints. Under this section of the textbook, Eisenhart and Spangel talk about how people reciprocate a negative behavior that they perceive as insulting or threatening with a threatening or negative response. And this is derived from the article by Alberts and Driscoll that essentially analyzed couples complaint episodes. We all know that even healthier relationships have conflict, but it's in the way that couples engage in those conflicts that determine whether they leave satisfied or dissatisfied. So in this article, Alberts and Driscoll essentially gather 40 couples and put them in conflict interactions. And what they found was that couples can essentially ignore the complaint, refocus the complaint, mitigate them, or work through them. And couples who left the conflict satisfied were 3 times more likely to engage in these actions rather than those who left dissatisfied, which engaged in unresponsive or escalated behaviors. And this is really crucial to know in conflicts because conflicts can indeed spiral depending on how one or the other party responds. The next set of authors that I'll be discussing are Todd Carver and Alberta Vondra. Their work is referenced in Chapter 2 under a section called Conflict in Action on page 23 towards the middle section of the page. And the title of their article is Alternative Dispute Resolution, Why It Doesn't Work and Why It Does. Essentially, the authors analyze alternative dispute resolutions and how some companies succeeded in utilizing them and how some of them failed. And alternative dispute resolutions are essentially kind of negotiations outside of a formal litigation or the courts. Think a mediation, an arbitration, or maybe a settlement conference. And ADRs were gaining popularity during this time as a cost-effective way to settle complaints or conflicts between employers and their employees. So Toyota was cited in this section of the book because of their success story. Toyota had a reversal arbitration board, which is essentially a formalized structure of an ADR. And that board set up the rules for arbitration, and they set up an infrastructure that essentially allowed open case files histories so that they could set up precedents. So essentially, even though this was an ADR or alternative dispute resolution, they formalized it in a way that essentially made it kind of like a mini court system, and it really worked in Toyota's favor. The article also cited Chevron for being a success story. And essentially what they found that ADRs worked predominantly for those companies that really made a commitment for them to work. Litigation tends to only result in a winner and a loser situation, but ADRs or conflict resolution really finds a solution that works for both parties, which I think is one of the takeaways in this article. The next set of authors are Kimmel, Pruitt, Maginot, Konar, Goldband, and Carnival. Their work is referenced in Chapter 3 under Factors That Promote Mutual Gains and Negotiation. And their article is called Effects of Trust, Aspiration, and Gender on Negotiation Tactic. Essentially, the authors analyze how trust, aspiration levels, and gender affected negotiation tactics. And what they found was that high trust and high aspiration levels led to successful negotiations in the form of direct information exchange. And why is this useful? Well, people are more likely to give you information or their side of the story or their side of the conflict if they trust you. And information like this is very useful because it's a logical way to problem solve in a collaborative way, because it helps both sides of the party find a mutually satisfying alternative. And lastly, Ronald Michelini's work is referenced in Chapter 3 for factors that inhibit effective negotiation, found on page 54 on the third paragraph. His work is called Effects of Prior Interaction, Contact Strategy, and Expectation of Meeting on Game Behavior and Sentiment. So essentially, the author examined how prior interactions and contact affected participants' coordination and game behavior. And this section of the textbook and the article essentially discussed the importance of how that pre-interaction or prior interaction can have on the success of the negotiation table. What the author had found was that positive interactions produced higher levels of cooperation compared to negative prior interactions. So, what it tells me is really it's important to have positive interactions even before negotiations begin because it will yield to higher levels of cooperation. And here is a list of the references and the authors that were cited in this presentation, including our Eisenhart and Spangle textbook. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and for your feedback. I look forward to hearing your presentations. Thanks and have a great day.